As we take a look firstly at the Seattle Seahawks in their past game down in LA. So it would be their second time in LA as they played in SoFi Stadium, having beaten the Chargers earlier in the year down there. Secondly, they would come down here on December 4th to beat the LA Rams 27-23. A late touchdown with under a minute left by DK Metcalf would win the game for the Seahawks. Seattle would hold on. Cody Barton would collect a game-sealing interception to beat the Rams, and that would do it, sending Seattle to a 7-5 record. So this was a big one, not only because it's a sort of divisional game, but also considering the fact that the Rams have always been a sort of tough team here over the time that Sean McVay has been the head coach. You're also battling for a playoff spot now that, you took the 2-game losing streak. And the 49ers have caught up to you. There's a bunch of teams that are in the hunt currently for that wild card spot, and now you have to keep pace with them and try to stack some wins up so that you can reach the postseason, which is not something that I thought that we would be talking about. I know that at the beginning of the year, 7 games was what I thought that this team would reach, and we're already at that point, with some games to play. So I'm happy with that, but things aren't going to get easier, unfortunately. So let's look at some offensive players of the game here. I went with wide receiver DK Metcalf, 8 receptions, 127 yards, and 1 touchdown. That would be a game winner with Jalen Ramsey draped all over his back after the 2-1 at it throughout the game. Bell went with Geno Smith, completing 28 of his 39 attempts, 367 yards through the air. That's the 7th time in Geno's career that he has topped 300 passing yards in a game. 3 touchdowns on the day and 1 interception, which could put some air quotes by it, as we'll address that in a second. But let's get to defensive players of the game here. Bell went with cornerback Tariq Woolen, 7 tackles on the day, only 1 of them solo, 1 interception, and 3 pass deflections. Woolen, with his 6th pick of the year, sets a rookie franchise record for interceptions. I went with outside linebacker Uchenna Nwosu, 4 solo tackles on the day, 2 sacks. 7 sacks would be a lot. I'm looking at 7 tackles for Woolen. Nwosu had 1 tackle for loss and 3 QB hits. So let's just look back here. We'll look at offensive and defensive, just a quick reflection on those. I thought the DK, had a big game. He had 110 yards for receiving throughout that 4th quarter, and to get that final one on Jalen Ramsey, of all people, was a pretty big deal. I'm sure not only for the team to get the touchdown, but for him and the battles that he has had with Ramsey. Geno played a great game. Pocket did not give him much to work with. He was under duress a lot against, again, a D-line. The Rams were without Matt Stafford, Jalen Ramsey. Their O-line was banged up. They had a bunch of injuries on that team, and they still pushed Seattle to the brink. I think that's more indicative of it being a divisional opponent, and Sean McVay's the coach, so it's going to be a tough game. I know a lot of Rams fans were like, "Oh, you should have beat us. You beat our practice squad." At the end of the day, these are still divisional games, and it's still the NFL. So there's still going to be a lot of tough games to play. But at the end of the day, Seattle got the win, so that's all that matters. On the defensive side of the ball, Uchenna continues to be a menace off the edge for this Seattle team. A really solid free agent signing. It feels like we say that every week. Tariq Woolen continues to improve. Sets a rookie franchise record for interceptions with that 6th pick. He no doubt had a busy day as well, with the Rams offense still being pretty pass heavy. So happy with this win. In terms of everything that took place, Seattle did lose a few running backs in this game, as Ken Walker and DJ Dallas had to leave the game with injury, putting Tony Jones Jr. into the game, a name that you have seen on this show in the inactives list. but it was important. He played some important snaps, and that's where we get to this interception that Geno Smith threw. So with both Walker and Dallas injured, Tony Jones Jr. had to take a lot of the snaps, and they used him pretty heavily. It's not like, okay, we're down to our third running back on the depth chart today, we got to avoid him. They gave him the ball, they ran the ball, they threw him the ball. It was kind of surprising. There was one play though where Jones Jr. caught a pass from from Geno Smith, pardon me, and Bobby Wagner basically just ripped it out of his hands. Bobby had a big game. Can't avoid that. Bobby Wagner had a big game for the Rams. He had 2 sacks in the first half. He had the interception to get the Rams the ball back when they were down by 4 points. So he had a big game, and you can understand that it meant a lot for him. He was very excited throughout the game, very animated, as was Jalen Ramsey, but that's to be expected. So just happy that Seattle got the win. But yeah, you could tell that meant a lot to him, and I can only imagine what that sort of reaction will be when he returns to Seattle. So it was a big game. It was a big game. Like I said, with the 49ers still at the top of the NFC West, beating the Dolphins over the past week. They did lose Jimmy Garoppolo to injury, and we'll look at that in a little bit when we get to league-related notes. But you look at the other teams in the wild card, you've got some ground to make up. You've got some things to get over. You got to catch up a little bit here if you want to make the playoffs. The Broncos lost again, so your pick there improves still, but it's an uphill battle, and especially with all these injuries that we saw, and we'll look at that here in a second. It's not going to get much easier. It's not going to get much easier. You're going to have to deal with what you've got. We're getting into the late stages of the season. Guys are going to be banged up. You're going to have to find ways to win. You're going to have to find ways to win. Simple as that. So we'll look at sort of injury-related things here and roster moves. Firstly, the inactives list against the Rams: wide receiver Penny Hart, cornerback Artie Burns, running back Travis Homer, tackle Jake Curran, defensive end LJ Collier, defensive tackle Miles Adams, safety Jonathan Abram were all inactive against the Rams. Yes, we'll get to that Abram name in a second. In sort of terms of injury-related updates, on the 29th, Seattle was sort of unsure if Ryan Neal could play, but they were optimistic about it. Pete Carroll said that he might miss some practice time with a pretty serious elbow issue, but could return. He did play some snaps throughout this game, but was on the sideline for a good amount as well. So kind of a mixed bag here. His replacement, Josh Jones, did leave the game with an injury, and we'll look at that here after we look at this roster sort of related stuff. On the 3rd of December, running back Travis Homer was listed out due to an illness. So wide receiver Laquan Treadwell and linebacker Vi Jones were elevated from the practice squad. And we look at sort of injuries sustained against the Rams. Running back Ken Walker left the game with an ankle injury. Pete Carroll has termed it as a jammed ankle. It's not a sprained ankle. And Walker's undergoing tests today to determine the severity of that injury. As I mentioned, safety Josh Jones went out with a hamstring injury, so Seattle was out without him for most of the second half. Running back DJ Dallas went out with an ankle injury, and wide receiver Marquise Goodwin went out with a hand injury. So Seattle's just going to have to deal with it. Without running back, Ken Walker, who knows how long he's going to be out. DJ Dallas has been banged up. He was going into the second half banged up. He did play some snaps throughout the rest of the game after sort of coming out, but not going to be good here. It seems like hopefully Travis Homer is going to be able to come back and play a good amount of snaps for Seattle next week, but it's going to be a tough slate for him dealing with all of that. So that, as well as on the 30th, the team claimed safety Jonathan Abram off of waivers. He is a former first-round pick of the Raiders back when John Gruden was the head coach and Mike Mayock was the general manager. Abram did spend a short visit with the Packers over the last few weeks, having been claimed by Green Bay off of waivers from Las Vegas. So potentially some safety depth there for Seattle, but just considering how quick he was in and out of camp with the Packers, I'm not sure how much of an impact he's really going to be able to make, unfortunately, just because the Packers are a team that needs some secondary help. And if they didn't want to keep him, I don't know how much that means towards us keeping him. So nonetheless, I digress. We'll look at some league-related news here on the 4th. This past Sunday, While the Seahawks were dealing with their game, the 49ers reported they were open to bringing Jimmy Garoppolo back next season. On the same day against the Dolphins, Garoppolo would break his foot and he is out for the year. So that's a tough loss for them. They were trying to keep top spot in the NFC West. Brock Purdy, a rookie quarterback, filled in for Garoppolo, and they would beat the Dolphins, but that's a loss for them on offense. Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, who is looking to cash in this offseason while being on the last year of his deal, left the game against the Broncos with a knee injury, and he will be out from days to weeks. So looking for some severity news on that injury as well. But the backup for the Ravens would be able to come in and beat the Broncos. So the Broncos struggles continue. Let's look ahead for our Seahawks here. They are 7-5. They still sit at second in the NFC West. They are in the playoff hunt. They're not in a playoff spot right now. And they look ahead to December 11th versus the Carolina Panthers. That is a 1:27 p.m. start time. It's going to be an interesting one with how banged up Seattle currently is. But the Panthers have had their own struggles with their roster. Baker Mayfield got put on waivers. So there's a lot of things that they need to figure out as well going forward. So it should be Seattle's returning home. You know, I know they're going to be banged up, but you look at that hopefully as a contest that Seattle should be able to pull out of.